I know that the Trump folks view themselves as pithy and quick. Do they have any response to the gutting of funding for federal law enforcement programs that take illegal weapons off the streets of American cities?
No, not at this point in time, Nicole.
Let me just real quick, do they have any response to the cuts in funds for cops on the streets of American cities?
No, not at this point in time. And look, this is
and just real
government.
Quick, one more time, do they have any response to the idea that this is a shadow operation that will racially profile Latino communities at a time meant to celebrate their heritage, September, by falsely accusing these community members of violent crime when the statistic is 77 of 78 people that get rounded up, usually being nonviolent non-criminals?
No, not at this point in time.
Interesting. What do they have?
I think that this weekend social media post by the President of the United States set up not only the preemptive order from the Chicago mayor saying that Chicago PD will not collaborate with federal agents or the National Guard on the ground, but also the remarks that we just heard here that were very poignant from the governor of Illinois. Essentially, this White House has premeditated their next move and said that Chicago is next. And I think that, I don't know if folks can hear from my microphone behind me, but during that press conference, I hear several hundred folks behind me here in Washington, D.C., protesting outside of the White House, chanting, "Whose streets? Our streets." This is still an issue here in Washington. And in a lot of ways, listening to these remarks, it is the question of what's next. And I go back to early June. Well, the National Guard and 700 Marines were deployed into the streets of Los Angeles. I was at Fort Bragg with the President of the United States, Nicole, when he was effectively rallying members of the military against Democratic officials. And it was the remarks from him at the time. In Los Angeles, these were his words: "The governor of California, the mayor of Los Angeles, they're incompetent and they paid troublemakers, agitators, and insurrectionists." It was not just a distortion of the violent crime rates in Los Angeles, but it was also a lie about what was taking place in the city of Los Angeles to justify his actions. And on Friday afternoon, before this weekend, this White House shut down for the weekend, I asked Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller specifically about their plans for the Chicago. He said he wouldn't divulge details, but I also asked him a very specific question of whether he had engaged with the president in a conversation about potentially invoking the Insurrection Act. And I asked that because Michael Schmidt back in 2021 reported that in 2020 that was a conversation here within this White House during the George Floyd protests. And knowing that J.B. Pritzker effectively making the case that he believes that this is an effort to manufacture chaos, and if the Insurrection Act were to be invoked by this White House, effectively it would toss aside the decision and the ruling of the federal judge in California today, and it would allow him to use the military for domestic civilian law enforcement purposes. I think there's a lot of questions about what we would be looking at in the weeks ahead if, in fact, he were to send not only the National Guard, but also other federal agents into the streets.
And all of it designed to scare people. And let's do a little bit more fact checking, because I think if they were on solid ground, they wouldn't be lying so much, would they? Donald Trump said this in the last hour, quote, "Chicago's a murder capital of the world." Fact check false. That's actually a distinction that Tijuana, Mexico has right now, the highest homicide rate in the world. Trump posted in that weekend post you're talking about, Vaughn, quote, "Chicago's the worst and most dangerous city in the world." That is also false. The U.S. city that cracks the top 10, there's only one, and it's Memphis, Tennessee. Has the White House addressed what it's going to do for Memphis, Tennessee today, Vaughn?
No, not for Memphis, Tennessee. And Speaker Mike Johnson sidestepped for Louisiana. I think Nancy Mace is somebody else we could look at. Nicole, she was asked, she's now running for governor of South Carolina. She was asked whether she would welcome the military onto the streets of South Carolina. And she said that she looked forward to seeing the president's actions in Chicago. So we have not heard a direct response to how the military or how the National Guard or how federal law enforcement would be used in Republican cities now.
I mean, hashtag sad, John Howland, for the people of Memphis, Tennessee, because if you think Chicago is a, quote, hellhole, it looks like statistically Memphis is underneath that. So I'm not sure what's underneath the hole of hell, but it must be really sad for them, according to Trump.
Yeah. Look, it has been transparently clear and obvious for quite some time that all of these activities from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., now in Prospect in Chicago, are not about crime.
To us, but not to his supporters. I mean, to us, it's been transparent. But if you watch Fox, all you see is a loop of crime stories.
I'm on Earth One. Okay? I'm on Earth One. I understand that there are propaganda, disinformation, and misinformation efforts. I also understand there are people who are deluded, people who are like really high on some incredible drugs, who see things that aren't there. I get all that. But again, on Earth One, just looking at who the targets are, looking at what the deployments have been, looking at where the troops have been stationed, looking at all those things, there you can have an interesting conversation about how much of that is about intimidation, how much of that is about fear, how much of that is about some longer game about federalizing and militarizing law enforcement for some political purpose as yet unknown. We can speculate about those possibilities, but there's a range of possibilities. What they're not about is a coordinated national policy on crime reduction, because that policy would involve calling together mayors, governors, state representatives, people from around the country. You'd pick out the cities that are in fact the most violent. They in fact have the highest crime rates. You pull them all together and say, okay, we have some problems in America. We do. Violent crime, some nonviolent crime, property crime. There's all kinds of crime problems. People are not wrong to think there's too much crime. In almost any town you live in America, there's more crime than you would want in your town. You would like to see active efforts on the part of the state, local, federal government to ameliorate the crime problem. But if you were going to do that, you would have to do it in a coherent, cohesive way, working in real partnership with governors in red states and blue states, in big cities, in small towns, in red states, in capitals around very Republican states and very Democratic states. You would do that in a triaged way. It's a big problem. So you'd think, where do we have to focus most intensely? Where do we have to put the most resources? What are the actual causes of this crime? What are the things we need to do on a day-to-day basis just to calm situations down in some places that really are full of fear for good reason? You do all that stuff. How much of that have we seen? We've seen none of that. What we've seen instead is what we had. We won't repeat what it's been. But so it's, to me, again, here on Earth One, judging the actual facts, it's clear that the objectives here are not about crime. And then the question becomes, what do Democrats do about that, given that they are the targets, whether it's Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Maryland, other places that are soon to come? And that's the big political question, is how well are Democrats in various places handling that? We've seen some variation between what Wes Moore is doing versus what J.B. Pritzker is doing. Both are resisting, but taking slightly different tones and slightly different tactics. We just saw a new move on the part of the mayor of Chicago, which is what we should probably talk about here, which is the first time I think we've seen a Democratic mayor, governor, or anything else make a direct link to gun policy that could change at the federal. If you want a partnership with us, President Trump, here's a thing you could do that would really help our city. And that's the point you're making rhetorically here, which is, hey, let's hear what they have to say about that, which will not be much.